Your radio for East Grinstead and beyond. For East Grinstead and beyond, it's Meridian FM.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside.
The original version of Twist and Shout by the Top Notes welcomes us back to the third hour of Music for Grown-Ups, and I'm really pleased to say that my guest tonight, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, has joined us again for the last hour, and we're going to do what's happened over the years, aren't we, Derek?
Absolutely, in the wonderful month of February.
Is February traditionally a good month, or are people just are they beginning to recover from Christmas, or do things take a while to get going again?
I think loads of great things happening. What was interesting, though, is when I was researching for the book, RocknRoll Unravelled, I couldn't find very much going on February the 29th. So I used it as an opportunity to indicate that February the 29th, 1959, the traditional golden era of rock and roll had drawn to a close, really as a final result of
you would have
events that happened today.
So you'd have thought they'd use the 29th as a kind of publicity stunt as well, wouldn't you, to sort of release things so that...
I mean, they're only 25% the opportunity. So, I mean, most days there's it's what to leave out rather than what to put in sometimes. Yeah. But that was an interesting one. But it did give me the opportunity to wax lyrical about the golden age of rock and roll. But, I mean, that's a classic track. That is the original version, made famous by the Isley Brothers.
I say most people think the Isley is the original. But
this is a year earlier.
Yeah, it's a bit like the I Fought the Law.
Absolutely, yeah. Cricket song.
The Crickets, of course, like you keep saying.
A wonderful version as well. And the Beatles, of course, made it very famous with their appearance on the Royal Command performance, when Lennon famously suggested that the people in the cheap seats clap their hands and the people in the more expensive seats just rattle the jewellery.
I wonder if they did. Do you think? Could you imagine the Queen? She suddenly, hang on.
Right.
I'll just get me pearl necklace and me crown. I'll bash them together a bit.
Exactly. Make some noise. Let's make some noise with our jewellery here, folks. But the guy that wrote that was Burt Burns, the man who kick-started Van Morrison's solo career. And he was also a producer. He was unimpressed. I can't see why. That's an Atlantic recording session. And it's one of the earliest examples of Phil Spector production. Phil Spector was the, co-producer on that particular track. And what happened was, with Burt Burns disappointed with it, he took it to Wand. And that's when the Isley Brothers recorded. And he supervised that particular recording himself, the Isley Brothers.
Was that actually a hit? The Top Notes
No.
one?
It may have been somewhere in
minor
the
somewhere.
99s, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't.
Right.
It didn't. I'm pretty sure it didn't grace the top 40.
So he must have been over the moon when the Beatles got hold of it.
Oh, I mean, the royalties are flooding in, I should think. I mean, still flooding in. And I mean, Phil Spector, interesting time for him, February. It was the 3rd of February when Lana Clarkson was found dead in his mansion. And by the time he got to May 2009, after 2 trials, he was found guilty and received 19 years to life for a murder. And there's some great birthdays. If you are a February child associated with Phil Spector, you've got Hal Blaine, the brilliant Wrecking Crew drummer, on the 5th. Sonny Bono on the 16th. Now, everybody knows him from Sonny and Cher, but he had some great individual singles as well, like Laugh at Me and Revolution Kind. And he was also a politician in the latter days, Palm Springs mayor and a congressman, but died sadly in a skiing accident back in 1998. Al Cooper was also born on this day on the 5th, guy that's formed Blood, Sweat and Tears, but decided to move on after their first album. More birthdays. If you're born on the 8th, you share it with Ben Palmer, a little-known hero, an associate of Eric Clapton. He played with him in his first band, the Roosters. Yeah. He went off on the Greek jaunt with Clapton that found them all trapped because they were working illegally. He was on the Various Artists album, Powerhouse, with 3 tracks. He's a pianist, this guy. Yeah. And then he was a roadie with Cream. So he pops up all over the place in Eric Clapton's story.
And dear listener out there in listener land, I really hope that you're learning something from this, because I am learning so much. I've not heard of probably about 90% of the people you've spoken about tonight.
There's lots more of those to...
that's wonderful. This is why I'm not saying too much, because it's all going in. I'm making mental notes, you see.
Well, I mean, you've got more. You've got Don Wilson on the 10th, one of the founders of the Ventures, one of the greatest instrumental combos of and successful combos of all time. And Ray Manzarek, the keyboards player, birthday on the 12th, and you're in there with the same guy. Interesting thing about the Doors was that they never used a bass player for live performances. They're on the albums, but Manzarek covered the bass lines on his keyboards. Yeah. And when Jim Morrison died, they made a couple of albums, Other Voices and the like, and he was the main singer after Jim Morrison. Glyn Johns, producer and engineer, birthday on the 15th. You're with him.
That's two people I've heard of.
Oh,
you're slipping.
There's lots of famous people as well. Rolling Stones, Beatles, they all pop up. Bob Dylan. Peter Tork of Monkees fame on the 13th. So lucky for some, I guess. But if we look at what happened on this day, on the 9th of February, across down the years, on the 9th, obviously, because it's the 9th of February, the first cavern appearance of the Beatles. They'd just come back from their first trip to Hamburg, and Stuart Sutcliffe had stayed behind because he was in love with Ingrid Kershaw, and he didn't come back. And that was when they had a friend of theirs studying for bass for 4 gigs, and that was when Paul McCartney moved across to bass, and he'd have been playing bass by then, because it was January when he took that up, and it was their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. You can confidently say that the British invasion started. A little bit more of this coming later, but that really was what kick-started it. That show was watched by 73 million people. Massive share.
What year was that?
This is 1964.
64. So what percentage
I didn't make a note of it.
Those days be about what? I don't know.
I think it was
about a quarter?
No, it's 50 or 60%.
Was it what in those days?
They have... sadly, it's all in the book, but I didn't make a note of it. But it's about 50 or 60. I was astounded. The percent might be higher. The percentage.
I guess it'd be about a quarter of today's population, wouldn't it? Thinking about it.
Yeah. But it was. It's the TV watching.
Any of our American listeners, if you want to let us know what the population of the USA was in 1964, we'd be very keen to know.
Exactly. It would give us a clue, wouldn't it? Yeah. Now, Cliff Richard had an interesting time on this day. He was in the studio at EMI for a couple of days, recording his first album, Cliff, and it was a sort of quasi-live album, and they had 200 fans in there for background ambience. The original Shadows lineup, Hank Marvin, Bruce Welch, Chet Harris and Tony Meehan, they'd only actually been together for about a month when they went into to cut this first album. And more birthdays. Carole King, one of the premier songwriters of any era, basically. She was born on the 9th, and spookily enough, her husband, and they sort of split up, sadly, as life is. He was actually born on the 11th, but he was a little bit older. He was born in 1939, the 11th, and she was born in 1942 on the 9th, on this day, as they say. Loving Spoonful, one of my all-time favourite bands. You could argue that the Beatles are the reason that they got together, because John Sebastian and Zal Janowski, who was the lead guitarist with the band, they were both chums of Mama Cass's, and Mama Cass invited them both around sort of afternoon tea and to watch the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, because they were getting a lot of publicity by the time of the Ed Sullivan Show. And they met, they watched them, and they got together. And about a year later, I think the Loving Spoonful became a very, very interesting band. And the first track, or second track really, is their Do You Believe in Magic from 1965.
How about that? Straight off the old vinyl, hence all the little gap and all the clicks and the cracks and all that. No, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Just how music should be.
Just how music. Us making the excuses for our incompetence.
There's always a justification in this life.
It certainly is.
For everything. But I mean, you could argue that really is where it started. But the British invasion, the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, when Capitol Records in America finally decide that the Liverpool Mop Tops might be worth a punt, their first American Capitol single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, entered the charts on the first in 1964. Now, three of the bands that were very successful in the British invasion were one, the Searchers. They had a lot of success in the States. The reason that they qualified for a chat in February is they were actually serving their apprenticeship in Hamburg on the 27th in 1963. They were supporting Gene Vincent. Now that would be some gig to watch in a steamy club in the Sailor's Haunt in Hamburg. And the Dave Clark Five, they were actually, next to the Beatles, they were the most successful commercially of the British invasion bands. And again, they're here today because on the 21st in 1964, they were playing bits and pieces on Ready, Steady, Go. But the interesting thing about that is, was it Dave Clark on the drums? Bobby Graham, very well-known, well, if you're a session musician, very well-known session drummer. On his website, he reckons that he played the drums on the recordings, the Dave Clark recordings, from the beginning, Do You Love Me in 63, right up to You Got What It Takes in 1967. I've seen reports that support this, and I've read reports that decry this. So, you know, it's up to each one of us to decide, maybe, was it Dave Clark or was it not Dave Clark?
You just don't know, do you?
That's right. Yeah, it'd be sad to think that the leader of the band wasn't actually playing the drums. But one of the biggest stories in February, obviously, is going to be Buddy Holly. Famously died on the 3rd February 1959 in a plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Big Bopper and Richie Valens. But the story goes back before that. In 1955, Buddy and Bob Montgomery, opened for Elvis in Lubbock, Texas. That's Buddy Holly's hometown. And the reason Holly was on tour really goes back to 1956. And on the 8th of February, he signed Decca. And that's famously when Decca got his name wrong on the contract. And Holley became Hollly. He liked it. He kept it. And that's Marvin Gaye added the E. Holly took the E out. You know, it's all just the way of the world. What happened? This is Decca he signed with. And he cut about four tracks with them, a couple of singles, and they went nowhere, basically. One of those was That'll Be the Day. Now, Holly's manager was Norman Petty, and he also managed the Crickets, and he signed the Crickets up to Coral. This is all the sort of Decca subsidiaries. And by the time that Buddy Holly was with the Crickets now, but by that he signed Buddy Holly up separately. And what happened was, because of contractual reasons, Buddy Holly's name didn't appear on their first single, That'll Be the Day. So that was credited to the Crickets. And all the Cricket stuff was released in America. All the Cricket stuff was released on Brunswick. And all the Buddy Holly stuff was released on Coral. But the problem was, by the time we get to sort of 1959, there's a big falling out going on because Buddy Holly was having enormous problems getting royalties, allegedly, from Norman Petty. And he was getting very low on money. So that was one of the reasons he undertook the Winter Dance Party. Now, to do a tour on a bus in the Midwest in winter. In a previous life, I used to spend time in Fargo, and I've been there in the winter. It is very, very cold. And what happened was that the drummer, to put it into context, the drummer had been hospitalised by the time of the gig at Clear Lake, Iowa. And Buddy Holly decided that he'd charter a small plane to get from the Clear Lake, Iowa gig to Fargo for the Moorhead gig. And sadly, the plane crashed and they were killed. And
Do you know anything about the crash itself? Did it crash because of the weather?
yeah, basically,
Right.
I did read a report that suggests that the pilot wasn't aware that the weather was closing in so badly in the Fargo area, and that again, this may or may not be true. But again, the report suggested that the pilot was still taking his sort of lessons in flying in really, really bad weather. Now, that may or may not be the case. Again, it was reported in a reasonable source. But there's irony upon irony piled on here. Richie Valens only died because he won the toss of a coin with Tommy Alsop. So Richie Valens won, got off the bus, got onto the plane, and the Big Bopper swapped seats with Chris Christopherson. So country legend and actor Chris Christopherson would not have been here, because they were his band, of course. Chris Christopherson was the bass player, Tommy Alsop was the guitarist, and that was why they were on the plane, but they swapped the seats. In fact, interestingly enough, a quick diversion, somebody contacted me, a collectibles organisation, and said, would you do guest blogs on my website, www.rocknroll.com. Their first guest blog went up, and it was about this.
Yeah.
And the blog is mostly about the memorabilia collectibles associated with that particular day. So various guitars, glasses, and things like that. So that's well worth a read if you're interested in memorabilia associated with that. And of course, that was why that was where Bobby V got his big break. The word went around Fargo, because they were playing Moorhead, which is like 10 minutes drive or something from Fargo. And they were looking for someone. Bobby V, I think he was 16 years old, stepped into the breach with his group, the Shadows, funnily enough. And he became famous. And his place on the tour was taken by Fabian and Frankie Avalon, clean-cut rock and roll kids. So you can see, so much you can read into this is how rock and roll was changing from the raucous rock and roll of the 50s to the clean-cut, very smart image of the early 60s. And in fact, if you're born on the 6th, you share the birthday with Fabian. Now, Joe Meek died, actually committed suicide. He blew his housekeeper away, famously, and then turned a shotgun on himself. He died on the 3rd, 1967, age of 37. And some commentators suggest that he chose this day. He was a very, very, very big Buddy Holly fan. And some people, I've seen suggestions that he chose that particular day to commit. So he was a strange fellow. And I thought, a Buddy Holly song, although if you look at the record label, it's credited to the Crickets. This is, oh boy.
Yes, what a great way to end a song. Like, talk about catch the DJ out. I wasn't expecting it to go there. I was expecting it just to fade out a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, don't listen to that one often enough. The Crickets there, and oh boy. It's me, Dave Roberts, on this side of the desk with the controls and the red microphone, and on the other side, our guest tonight, our once-a-month musical historian, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine. And of course, we're doing what happened on this day over the years. If you want to get in touch, the email, as always, studio@meridianfm.com. Derek.
Yeah, there were a few interesting things going down on this side of the pond as well. Screaming Lord Sutch on the 24th in 1983 had his first outing as the official Monster Raving Loony Party candidate, and he stood in Bermondsey. He had actually been in he'd formed a couple of previous parties, political parties, the Teenage Party and the like, but that was the first time he actually stood as the Monster Raving Loony. If you share your birthday on the 14th, it'll be with Big Jim Sullivan, very legendary guitarist, played with Marty Wilde and the Wildcats. Bill Haley, American rock and roll came to the UK on the 5th of February 1957 when Bill Haley came over for the first tour by a major American artist. And Ray Charles recorded What I Say on the 18th in 1959. Interesting story there, because he was playing a club and he got towards the end of the set and he had about 15 minutes left, and so he turned to his backing band the girl, lady vocalists, support vocalists, and he said, "Look, we're going to go into this. I'm just making this up as I go along, so just follow my lead." And they played the first version of "What I Say," and then when he took that into the recording studio, it ran to about 7 minutes, and the producers say, "No, this is going to have to go on to part one. No, we're going to have to cut it. We're going to have to cut this down to the normal 2-3 minutes." He absolutely refused. So the original recordings have it as parts 1 and parts 2. And if you listen to the single, you'll see where the extended piece the idea came from, with a call and response of that particular track. The Everly Brothers were trying to carve out success for themselves early on with their first single on Columbia, Sank Without Trace, Keep a Loving Me. But Don Everly's birthday is on the 1st. He's the elder of the two. And there were some great albums around this time. The Allman Brothers released Eat a Peach, and it's generally thought that the peach truck on the album cover is because when he died in a motorcycle accident, he'd hit a truck that was carrying peaches. But apparently that's not the case. It comes from a quote in an interview. When asked about coming to Georgia, he said, "Well, every time I'm in Georgia, I eat a peach for peace." It's apparently the origin of that. And that was released on the 12th in 1972. 1976, the 13th, Peter Frampton released his very successful Frampton Comes Alive album, but probably the greatest live album of all time. The Who Live at Leeds was recorded on Valentine's Day in 1970 at Leeds Refectory. And this is a cover of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates' 1960 song, Shaking All Over.
If you're going to do a live album, I think that's the way to do it, don't you?
That is.
Absolutely fantastic. The Who from Live and Leeds. Johnny Kidd's Shaking All Over. Of course, the Johnny Kidd version as well was just as fantastic, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
The album was very nearly live at Hull, but apparently the recording session, the bass guitar didn't come out very well in the recording, so they opted for the live at Leeds. But the live at Hull is around. I mean, you can actually
you can get it.
Hear it.
I bet you nowadays, if they got hold of it, they could probably bring up the bass, couldn't they?
I think it's. I've listened to it, and it didn't sound too bad to me. So I think it's been heavily doctored now.
And I'd imagine
technology now, you can do pretty much anything.
I'd imagine it's the same set.
I would think so.
Yeah. Incredible.
Absolutely unbelievable. I saw them back in the My Generation days when Keith Moon was playing with 2 cymbals, 3 tom-toms, and smashing the kit.
Yeah.
Unbelievable to see.
I never actually saw the Who live, but I think the nearest experience of seeing them live was when they did the famous gig at Charlton Football Ground. I think it was broadcast live on TV. And I can remember I don't know what year it was, mid-70s, was it?
Yeah.
I can remember I was living in a flat, being in the front room, turned all the lights off, turned just the TV, obviously no surround sound, nothing like that. It was just straightforward coming out the TV, turned it up as loud as I could possibly stand it, and just sat there and watched it. And I was mesmerised with it. I thought it was a breathtakingly fantastic gig, absolutely amazing. And it's one of those things that I'm just watching it on TV, and yet it is just an experience that I've never forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd imagine being there must have been
awesome.
1,000 times better.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, another band that was carving a name for themselves around this time was Led Zeppelin, of course. On the 28th in 1970, they were performing in Copenhagen, and one of the descendants from the Zeppelin Empire, who made the airships, of course, suggested that if they dared perform in her native Copenhagen, without permission to use the name Zeppelin, she would have them all locked up and throw away the key. So they performed as the Knobs while they were over there. That's N-O-B-S, which I always thought was quite nice.
Talking about Led Zeppelin and changing their name, I've said this before, but I've got a friend who swears virtually on the Bible, on his mother's life, etc., etc., that he just went to the marquee one night just for something to do, didn't know who was on, and he said, I was just standing at the bar and this band came on, I wasn't even looking at them, and they started up, and it was Led Zeppelin, but they'd gone on under the name of the Mixtures.
Oh, right.
That would have been, again, mid-70s, 77, 76, something like that. Whether it's true or not, he swears it's true.
Could well be.
Anyone out there know? Let us know.
Yeah, if you were there that night, that would be a ticket that's worth holding on to for a while.
Yeah.
In 1968, on the 23rd, Band of Joy were playing one of their last gigs. Now, Band of Joy actually had John Bonham as the drummer and Robert Plant as the singer. And from that, Tim Rose was playing that night, and he liked John Bonham, and he invited John Bonham to join his touring band. And if you haven't actually come across singer-songwriter Tim Rose, check him out. He's the Morning Dew man. Absolutely superb. And Robert Plant, shortly after this Band of Joy, he recorded a couple of tracks with Alexis Corner, Steal Away and Operator. So he has certainly mixed with rock and roll blues, British royalty. But Pink Floyd had an interesting time. On the 17th, in 1972, they were playing a very early performance of Dark Side of the Moon at the Rainbow Theatre in London. And that was a full year before the album was actually released. You can imagine now it would just be so heavily bootlegged and everybody would have a copy of it. There wouldn't be a lot of point in releasing it a year later.
Well, I saw the Floyd. It was the first gig I ever went to. And I saw the Floyd, and they did the Dark Side. And that was at I think it was at Earl's Court. But part of the set was, I think, 2 songs that actually ended up on Wish You Were Here. But they changed the lyrics around a little bit. One, I think on Wish You Were Here, it was Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Yeah. But on the night, it was called You Gotta Be Crazy. Yeah. But obviously, I don't know, perhaps it was just something they like to do, sort of put out the feelers, do the track, and then see what the response was.
Yeah, Frank Zappa used to do the same thing. He used to tour new material for a year before he actually put it together onto an album. It's a great idea, really, really hone it. The other great Pink Floyd, well, one of the other great Pink Floyd albums, The Wall, had its first concert performance on the 7th in 1980, and The Wall actually came about after. Excuse me. The Wall actually came about after a Pink Floyd gig in Canada, Montreal, I think, on the 6th of July 1977, when Roger Waters was upset people were throwing firecrackers, and he actually spat at a fan, and the idea that came to him that he loved performing, but if he could just keep away from the audience, life would be good. Oh, why don't we build a wall between the band and the audience? And they did, and the wall was born. But by the time that they came to perform this, Rick Wright was actually on the payroll. He'd actually been sacked. Roger Waters wasn't really getting on with the rest of the band, and you would see from the Live Aid there's a lot of acrimony going on there, and that was very much Rick Wright out of the picture by then. But I saw The Wall a couple of times in London, and David Gilmour, when he comes up on a forklift truck above the wall to do the solo for Comfortably Numb, absolute memory. I can see it now. Absolutely amazing. One reason or another, I did have a backstage pass for one of those performances, and I was in the little well where the security people are between the stage and the audience. And that was a pretty interesting experience. But the punk front was going forward in leaps and bounds in the February. On the 29th, the Stranglers were at the Roundhouse, and that was really the beginning of their rise to fame. Hugh Cornwell had been with Richard Thompson of Fairport Convention and Emil and the Detectives, a schoolboy band. Hugh Cornwell went off to Sweden around 72, and formed Johnny Socks, came back to the UK with Johnny Socks, and Jet Black joined them. And by 74, they'd morphed into the Guildford Stranglers. Sid Vicious, he died on the 2nd in 1979. He was out on bail for the murder of Nancy Spungen, and that's one of life's great unknown stories, didn't he? And the Damned released their first album on the 18th, 1977. That was it's considered to be the first punk LP. Now they had the first punk single as well with New Rose, but this is the B-side. This is a storming version of the Beatles' Help.
Well, that was quick, wasn't it? There was me going out for a couple of pints, but
yeah, you got me back
but hey, I missed it.
so.
As a quickie, I mean, what was that? How many? 1:38 or something? 2 minutes or whatever.
No, it's just over a minute and a half.
Very quick, very quick. Still,
whoa, it's all over.
I don't know. Paul McCartney needs the money, so why not?
Yeah. Interesting thing was going on with the Beatles in February. On the 2nd, 63, they started their first UK tour with Helen Shapiro. And on the 11th, 64, they had their first concert in America. That wasn't actually the tour. That accolade belongs to Dave Clark. He led the British invasion ashore as the first British band to tour. George Harrison was convicted of plagiarism. Accused of it on the 10th in 1971 because the Chiffons publisher believed that He's So Fine was a little bit too similar to My Sweet Lord for their tastes. So his 28th birthday on the 24th, 1943 was probably not a very happy one. John Lennon released a RocknRoll album, and he had plagiarism problems with Chuck Berry, because he copied Come Together. We'd taken the lyric, Here Comes Old Flat Top, from Berry's You Can't Catch Me, cured the problem by finally releasing the album with a couple of Chuck Berry singles on it. Birthdays for the Rolling Stones, 28th, 1942, Brian Jones. 28th, Giorgio Gomelski. Anybody who heard the Crawdaddy story last time, he was a big player there. But the one that I'm really excited about this month was on the 24th, Paul Pond's birthday. He was born on the 24th, 1942. You might know Paul Pond. He later became Paul Jones, the lead singer with Manfred Mann. And it's generally reported in lots of places that Brian Jones and Paul Pond played together in a band called Thunder Road in the Big Secret. Now, on the website, I actually put this article up where I said that, Brian Jones's career started, blah, blah, blah. And on Facebook, I got a response from Paul Jones, the Radio 2 Paul Jones, and he said, actually, I was never in a band with Thunder Road, in the Thunder Road in the Big Secret with Brian Jones. I invited him to join me, but he declined the offer. So, good thing Facebook. I Facebooked him back and said, well, were you ever in a band with Paul Jones? And he said, he responded again and suggested, no, we never actually played in a band together. We did, with a few other musicians, cut some singles, put them on a CD and get them to Alexis Corner, but we never really heard back from him. So if you're out there and you read that Paul Jones and Brian Jones were in Thunder Road in the Big Secret, it ain't so.
It's a big lie.
You heard it here first.
It's a big lie. I'm quite honoured. I'm quite honoured. Wow, so like, oh, wow. Breaking news.
Breaking news. Paul Jones. Wow. I hope he's listening tonight. Hello, Mr. Jones.
Of course he is.
And Genesis. Interesting time for Genesis. Paul Collins was playing in a band called Flaming Youth on the 4th in 1970. He replaced John Mayhew in 1970 as the drummer with Genesis. And in 1976, he replaced Peter Gabriel as the singer. The first album there was Trick of the Tail. And their first single, interesting story, this, in 22nd of February 1968, they released The Silent Sun and That's Me. What happens, the original Genesis guys were all chums at Charterhouse, a rather exclusive public school, and old boy Jonathan King came along to see them, and they had a cassette recording of some of their stuff, and they managed to get it to Jonathan King, and he gave them a 1-year contract. They released, I think it was 4 singles and an album, all sang pretty much without trace. They were dropped by Decca, but went on. It was actually Jonathan King's idea. They should call themselves Genesis. And Peter Gabriel's birthday is on the 13th. His last gig, basically, was the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And this is Carpet Crawl.
The Carpet Crawl from Genesis, of course, from Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Absolutely.
Peter Gabriel's voice.
fabulous.
Unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's just Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
You can't put him anywhere else, can you?
No. And it was interesting, by the time you got into the sort of latter time, he was dressing up. I mean, you see pictures of him dressed as a flower and all kinds of things.
Shaving the front bit of his head and...
absolutely. What a character.
Pretending to mow the grass in... what's the single they had? Why do I go blank like this? I should write it down, shouldn't I?
That was a good idea. But, I mean, he went on to a phenomenal solo career. But, I mean, still lots of great things happening in February down the years. On the 27th in 2008... Eric Burdon's Mirage album was finally released. It's another one of, this one's a 1970s lost classic album, recorded originally around 1973. And one of the tracks, The Story of Life, was actually used the lyrics from Jimi Hendrix.
Sorry, Derek. Can I just butt in?
Absolutely.
Here? My daughter has just sent me a message, and it said, "If you were a singer, you'd sound like Peter Gabriel."
Oh, no compliments. They don't come much better than that, do they?
You've lost your thread now.
No. We're back at the story of life, written by Jimi Hendrix. The lyric. On the night that he died. And the connection with Eric Burdon goes more than that. The last time that Hendrix ever played was at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London, and he jammed with Eric Burdon, who was with War at the time. And the idea of Mirage was it was a concept album and movie, but it never really came off and wasn't released until 2008. And Randy California, if your birthday's on the 20th, you share a birthday with Randy California, actually born Randy Wolf. Now, he was in a band, probably the last band that Hendrix was with just before he came over to the UK to find fame and fortune with the Experience. And it was Jimmy James. He was calling himself Jimmy James at the time. And this was Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. The problem was there were two Randys in the band. So Hendrix decided to call Randy Wolf Randy California, because that was where he was from, and the name stuck. He of course went on to form Spirit and had interesting discussions with Led Zeppelin recently. Some sad deaths today. On the 8th in 1990, Del Shannon died at the age of 55, and Vincent Crane died, founding member of Atomic Rooster. They'd been with The Crazy World of Arthur Brown with Carl Palmer, and they left during the Arthur Brown tour of America, and they were flying back on Friday the 13th and decided to form Atomic Rooster. And if you check out the first album, you'll find that Friday the 13th is one of the tracks on the album. A lawsuit on 10th, 1978. It was actually when Judas Priest released. That date was Judas Priest released an album called Stained Glass that had a track, Better By You, Better Than Me, that some people might know better as a Spooky Tooth track off their Spooky 2 album, 1969 album. And a couple of American youths decided that there was a message, subliminal message in there to commit suicide, and they took a shotgun to themselves, and one of them managed to kill himself, the other one managed to blow half his face away. And the parents sued them and the record company, but they didn't win that one. Judas Priest actually survived that particular attack. Frank Zappa, great hero of his, was Johnny Guitar Watson, and on the 1st, 1954, he recorded Space Guitar, which has early examples of reverb and feedback. Guy was way ahead of his time. And in fact, Johnny Guitar Watson's birthday is on the 3rd, so if you're born on the 3rd of February, you share it with the great Johnny Guitar Watson. And a connection with Zappa and Alice Cooper as well. Alice Cooper's birthday is on the 4th of February. And he was quite... Cooper had his first single on Zappa's Straight label. And he also had the chicken incident in Toronto in 1969. But I think that the track we should really finish the evening in is Johnny Cash's birthday on the 26th, 1932. and this is the unbelievable Solitary Man.
Derek, it's been absolutely wonderful, as usual. How you fit all that lot into 1 hour, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tracks as well. Just amazing.
I really enjoyed it.
And with the amount of paper there, you could have probably gone on for another hour.
Oh, we could go on all night, mate. I really enjoyed it.
Derek, be fantastic. And you'll be in again in about a month's time.
It's exactly a month, in fact, on the 9th.
Good, brilliant, lovely. Well, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening. I'll be back next week. I haven't got any guests planned as of yet, but hey, things happen. Things happen. For now, Derek, thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Taking us up now to the 11 o'clock news. A bit of Johnny Cash and the Solitary Man, which could be me next week, all on my own. Thanks a lot for listening. Good night.